Welcome back to Boxwood Avenue. Today we are going to be talking about warm white paint colors. How to pick the perfect warm white, no matter the light. After you watch this video, you are going to be an expert at picking white paint colors. I'm going to share all of my interior designer tips and hacks, and I really think you're going to find this video helpful. I'll talk about some of my favorite paint colors, understanding undertones, artificial versus natural light, and all of the other things that you need to consider when you are picking the perfect warm white paint color for your home. Ready? Let's get into it. If you are new here, my name is Chloe. I am an interior designer, founder of Boxwood Avenue. I'm really known for blending old with new in our design firm, and I share lots of lifestyle and recipe inspiration on my blog, boxwoodavenue.com, and on my social media. You can find me at Boxwood Avenue. I travel to Europe very frequently, so I'm always very inspired in bringing some of that slow European lifestyle back into the States throughout all of our design projects. We serve clients globally, and we're really known for bridging the gap between past and present and creating really not too precious, beautiful lived-in spaces. I hope that this inspires you and gives you lots of ideas for your own home. When I first got started in interior design, I had read so many articles about picking the perfect white paint color, and I'm going to be honest, I really thought that everybody was crazy. I remember just thinking, who cares? White paint seems like white paint. You really can't go wrong. Just go to the paint counter and pick something out. And now I am definitely one of those people where I'm like, oh, it's feeling a little too warm. It's like so obnoxious, but it's really true. And I want to teach you some of the things that I've learned throughout the years of understanding design better, because it is those little details, the little nuances in design that seemingly don't matter that really do. And I hope to impart some of those things on you today so that you can have some takeaways and really implement it into your own home. So when you're talking about picking the perfect white paint color, I prefer a warm white. My aesthetic is blending that old with new, bridging the gap between past and present. And so I prefer a very rich, deeply saturated white paint color. I really don't care so much for a bright white, and I think that a richer, creamier white is going to really give you a bit more elevated design and aesthetic. So I'm going to be teaching you how to understand undertones within whites and really looking at artificial versus natural light, the direction of a room, and how you can understand your own space to make a really great decision about picking the perfect white paint. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with talking about undertones because I think that that's really one of the most important things to consider. Understanding undertones, the way that I think about this is really in photography and light. Before I got started in interior design, I started as a photographer and really blogger. And so I had to learn about balancing light. So you might have seen some or heard somebody say, oh, that pulls a little pink, that pulls a little green, that pulls a little yellow or a little blue. If you think about like a cross like this, there are different undertones. So there's pink and green, and then there's yellow and blue. And you want to balance out these undertones in the white kind of shades. You don't want something to pull one way too far or the other. Now, most commonly, you're going to see something pull a little too blue or a little too warm, and this is because of the light in your space. So if you have a north-facing room or a south-facing room, you're going to have different undertones that come through, whereas in one room, a paint color could pull really blue, but in a different facing, a different room that's facing a different direction, that could pull really yellow. So you're going to want to test these samples, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but first and foremost, you want to understand undertones within the white paint. And this is actually pretty easy to do if you are researching white paint colors. All of us bloggers, we're going to be talking about, individual paint colors. We'll talk about the undertones. So first, you can just read up on it. Also, a lot of the paint brands will tell you exactly what undertones are in the shade of white. Now, like I said, I prefer a warmer white, so most of the undertones that I really gravitate towards would be a little bit more yellow. There's a key here though, you don't want the paint to feel yellow unless that's intended, but you want it to have just a slight hint of gray and yellow because that's going to balance things out and give you a warm paint color without it pulling yellow. Now, if you have a little bit of gray and it's pulling a little cool or a little blue, that's when I think things start to feel a little cold, like hospital-like. So you really want to avoid, in my opinion, blue undertones. If anything, I'd say go more of like the warmer yellow undertones. And then let's talk about the pink and the green because that's kind of the secondary undertone of different shades of white. If you live in an area where maybe you're surrounded by nature and there's tons of green surrounding you, you may want to opt for a shade of white that has a little bit more pink to it because it's going to be balanced out. Or on the flip side, maybe you live in the desert and there's kind of pink tones. You may want to opt for a shade of white that has a little bit more green undertones because that's going to create balance. So the key here is balancing out all of those undertones. And when in doubt, I say go a little bit warmer. Let's talk about some of the best warm white paint colors that you'll hear lots of interior designers talking about. Swiss Coffee, Alabaster, and then some of my personal favorites, Pointing by Farrow and Ball, Slipper Satin by Farrow and Ball I also really like. My friend Jamie, she loves James White as well as Wimborne White, and she painted her house those colors. They're so beautiful. And I've also been really, really liking Old White. Those are all by Farrow and Ball. They're all beautiful, warm white paint colors that are a bit more saturated, which, like I said, I prefer. I feel that this gives a bit more elevated, a little bit more refined look than typically you'd see with something more like Chantilly lace or Simply White or Pure White. All of those are going to be a lot cooler, a lot brighter. And when you're thinking about a nice, creamy, warm white paint color, you really want to go with something that has a bit more saturation to it. My number one no fail warm white paint color is Alabaster. Now this is almost like hesitant to even say it because it's so unoriginal, but it has popularity because it really is a good color. If you are in doubt and if you cannot decide on a paint color, I promise you Alabaster is going to look good in your space no matter the light. It's tried and true. You can count on it. Now, if you want something a little bit more original, I say go for Old White, Slipper Satin, or Pointing by Farrow and Ball. Now, Old White it's actually the oldest, formulated to be one of the oldest looking paint colors. So it's definitely almost more like, I don't want to say beige, but it's very saturated. It's almost not a white. So if you want something that is truly white, Old White probably isn't for you. It's my favorite of the moment though, so I definitely wanted to mention it. But also try Slipper Satin and Pointing by Farrow and Ball. Schoolhouse White is another really great one. You're going to want to sample all of these and I will talk about sampling them. But again, these paint colors are all going to look different in different light settings. Like I said, Alabaster is tried and true. It's no fail. You can totally opt for it. I really like Alabaster because I think that it really has a nice richness to it and it almost feels like, even if it's just a normal paint, it almost feels like a lime wash. And so I really like using this, especially in our more contemporary projects. I think that Alabaster just always looks good. Another one that you've probably heard of and read about all over the internet is Swiss Coffee, especially at 75%. I think Studio McGee did this first and then we all followed suit and because it's great. Swiss Coffee at 75% is the perfect like desaturated warm white for a nice bright look. So if you are looking for a nice bright white that skews a little bit warm, that's gonna look good in a variety of light settings, Swiss Coffee at 75% is a really good one as well. One of the most important things to consider when you are selecting a white paint color is the lighting, because everything is made up of light, and especially when we are talking about the nuances of different shades of white, you want to consider the natural lighting as well as the artificial lighting in your home. I mentioned, if you live in the forest and you have lots of greenery coming in, that green is going to be reflecting off of all of your white walls, so you may want to opt for a paint that has some more slight pink undertones to it. Or if you live in a home where you have tons of beautiful natural light, very, very sunny location, lots of warm light coming in, you may not want to select a paint that's quite as warm because it may tend to pull a little bit yellow. A lot of the time in our homes, we will select a base color of white, paint our whole house that color, and then you can add, like here in my entryway, I've painted it darker. I don't think that this is always the best route to go if you want to really curate your home and have distinctive spaces. I, of course, really like color and pattern, so whenever I can add color to a room and not go with white walls, I tend to try to do so. But if you are selecting white for your home, you want to consider if the room is north facing or south facing in particular, because a north facing room is going to have a lot of cooler light. It's not going to get as much of natural light, so you will want to select a paint color that skews a little warmer. And then on the flip side, if you have a south-facing room, it's going to get a lot more of that natural light, so you may want to opt for a paint that has a little bit of cooler undertones so that it doesn't pull yellow in that afternoon sunlight. Now, something we also have to consider is that the sun is not always shining. There is nighttime, and so you are going to have artificial light about half of the time. Now, one key, this is like a sidetrack, but select light bulbs that have a little bit of a warmer undertone. I can't tell you how often I go into spaces and the light bulbs are at like, really, really cool temperature, and it skews everything. I really like a nice warm light bulb. I want to say like 2700 is really my ideal. Some people prefer 3000, but I like a 2700 because I think that it has almost that like candlelight coziness feel to it. And so for your lamps and for all of your light bulbs, I say go for a little bit warmer. But that's just a sidetrack. Just consider though, actually, the temperature of your artificial light. If you have a lot of LEDs, you may want to go for slightly warmer white paint color because the LEDs are going to cool things down a bit. So it's always like I said at the beginning of this video, you're just kind of always balancing out all of those undertones. Once you've decided on color, you have really only gotten through half the battle, because now it's time to decide on the finish and the sheen of paint. There are lots of different sheens and there are lots of different uses. So whenever I'm working with a client, I'm always thinking about the feel of the space and how we want the space to really interact with the rest of the home and with those who are using it. So oftentimes there are families to consider, and so you may hear that it's better to go with a paint sheen that is wipeable and cleanable. And this is certainly true, but oftentimes I see people go for like a satin finish on their walls rather than like an eggshell or even a matte, and I think that that's a mistake. I prefer a matte look or even an eggshell look. I also really like painting the baseboards and trim and walls all the same color. Painting the ceiling the same color is like a 50-50 for me. Sometimes I do feel that it's best, and then sometimes I prefer a more traditional look and I'll paint the ceiling white. So it really depends on the overall look and feel of your space if you paint the ceiling the same color or not. But as a general rule of thumb, I really do like to paint the baseboards and trim and walls all of the same color. That said, for example, I've mentioned I'm really loving old white lately. For a really traditional look, you could paint the walls old white, and then you could do the trim a slightly different shade, and that's going to give some contrast. So there isn't a single rule of thumb. Whenever I'm doing consults or I'm working with clients, we're really just taking into consideration the overall look and feel of the space, because there's not a hard and fast rule. If you want a rule, if you like to operate off of rules, you're like, I just need to know, I'd say more often than not, we do match the trim to the walls. Sometimes we'll do a contrasting trim though. Typically in that case, we'll go darker than lighter. But again, if your white walls are a little bit more saturated, like if you did old white, I'd go with a lighter shade on the baseboard. Now, you can always reach out to me. I love helping people narrow down their paint colors. We also have a free quiz on my blog. If you want to take the quiz, it's going to tell you exactly what your aesthetic is and your style. And based off of that, I've provided the best white paint color for your specific style, which takes all of the guesswork out. And like I said, this is totally free. So I'll put a link to that if you want to take that quiz. It's kind of fun to see what paint color is just right for you. Another consideration and something that you'll see when you are selecting white paint is LRV. This is the light reflective value. Now 100 would be super, super, super reflective, and then 0 would be black. So that's the scale. Typically, I prefer something that's not quite in the 90s, not in the upper 80s, like something that is nice and balanced when I'm looking at LRV. But really what you need to know about this is that the higher the LRV, the more reflective and bright it's going to be. So if you're thinking, I really want a nice, bright, warm space, go for something that has a little bit higher of an LRV. And if you want something that's a little bit more cozy, a little bit more saturated, that's what I prefer. Go something with just a slightly lower LRV. As an interior designer, I would never approve a white paint sample without testing it in a space. A lot of people make the mistake of taking the white paint and putting it right up on the wall like over old paint. And like I said, this is a mistake because the undertones of the old paint are going to come through that white. So what you want to do is take a poster board or a piece of cardboard and paint a couple of coats of that white paint onto it and then tape that up into the space. different walls, different directions, check it at different times of day. That is going to give you the most honest feedback on the white paint. And then you also, I was holding these earlier, these are from Sampleize. We use these all of the time for our design clients, and they are really cool because they have like wall texture to them, so you can really see what it's going to look like. And you can actually just peel and stick. Let's see if I can do this. You just peel it like that and stick it to your wall, and then you can really get a better idea of what the paint is going to look like in the space. I think they're like $5, something like that. So if you are trying to narrow down some white paint samples, Sampleize is a great resource. That wraps up my thoughts as an interior designer on warm white paints. I'm sure I could go on and on and on. I hope that you've learned a lot and have newfound confidence in selecting the perfect warm white paint for your home. If you still need a little bit of help, like I mentioned, we have our free quiz on my website. You can take that, and I've narrowed down based off of style the best paint color for your aesthetic. We also offer consults, just virtual consults where I can help you check out paint, different lights. I can also help you like space plan and do lots of different things. You would be surprised what we can accomplish in an hour. I'll put a link to my calendar. You can book a time with me at any time. I truly love working with clients all across the world, helping them create spaces that they love. Our design firm also serves clients all across the world. Like I mentioned, we're really known for blending that old with new and creating not too precious, really lived-in spaces. If you're planning a remodel or new build, I'd love to learn more about your project to see if it would be a good fit. For more design inspiration, be sure to follow along. You can find me at Boxwood Avenue, subscribe here on YouTube, and don't forget you can always visit my blog, boxwoodavenue.com.